also the role of science diplomacy. By the way, I agree with the main points that the President made. It is absolutely important for scientists and professionals to have a greater hand not only in diplomacy but in generalized policy making throughout the country. We seem to have fallen out of that habit, which probably is the reason for the decline that we have faced in the last few years. So let's start with what are the many global issues that are a problem for us. Poverty and inequality, there are like 2 billion poor people on the planet. Resource shortages, energy, water. You hear of collapse of the financial sector. You have unexpected shocks. For example, COVID-19 was an unexpected shock, but many other things, earthquakes, conflicts, and these are actually the most damaging. Of course, very weak leadership, we'll talk more about this, and climate change, which is the ultimate threat multiplier because it makes all the other problems worse, right? Now, unfortunately, 7.8 billion people on the planet should be working together to solve this problem, but that is not the case. We are trying to solve one problem at a time. Everything is so interrelated, as scientists, you know this epistemologically, that we need integrated solutions. And our leaders also don't understand this. I think especially we are having better success at the middle level, like CEOs of companies or mayors of cities and community leaders, rather than national leaders. National leaders are only thinking of the next election. So, let's take a very quick look at this link between resource limits, inequality, and the poor. There is a concept called ecological footprint of humanity, which is the sum total of ecological resources. Those of you who study ecology will understand this. What is required on a global basis to support human life. In 2012, we needed 2 planets' worth to do this, 1.5 planets, sorry. By 2030, we will need 2 planets, and we only have 1. So, a highly unsustainable situation. Now we can ask, who is consuming these resources? Okay, there is this infamous champagne glass, which shows you the inequality. 85% of consumption is done by the top 20% of the richest people on the planet. They are consuming 60 or 70 times more than the bottom 20%. And for example, 800 million, almost 1 billion people are starving. Just imagine 1% of the richest people own more wealth than the remaining 99%. 1% of the richest emit 175 times more greenhouse gases than the poorest. And if you look at global military expenditures, it's over 2 trillion, that's $2,000 billion. But aid for the poor is only 160 billion, it's less than 1/10. So there is a complete misallocation of funds. Now if you put those two concepts together at the top, you'll see that the rich are already using more than 1 planet. So there are not enough resources to help the poor. That's why we have over 75 years of unmet goals and broken promises at all the conferences. The global leaders get up. It's a photo opportunity for them. They promise various things. 1947, there was UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Every country signed. And very fine document. 2015, 17 Sustainable Development Goals, every country signed. But every one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals was already in the 1947 document. So the question I have asked of global leaders at major conferences, where is the progress for 75 years? I'm not very popular for this reason, but there you have it. So finally, the IPCC, where I worked for 2 or 3 decades. Climate change, let me say, we have a huge report this thick, but I'll just give you a couple of key points. First is, it is a real phenomenon. It is because human beings in the last 200 years have emitted too many greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. For the future, the poor will suffer most from the impacts. Okay, this is part of climate justice, which I'll talk about later. But there is a ray of hope, and this is one of the reasons why we received the Nobel Prize for Peace in 2007, which is that we showed that sustainable development is the best way to limit climate change. Why? Because we can integrate climate strategy policy into sustainability strategy. We can solve not only the climate problem, but all the other problems like poverty and hunger and ill health and so on, all at the same time. These are integrated solutions. So this is the Sustainable Development Goals, which you can see on the bottom right-hand side. We must work together to achieve this global vision, and I think science diplomacy is a very important element of that. There is something called Earth Eco-Civilization in the 21st century, which we want to work towards. The Sustainable Development Goals is a monitoring framework, but it has to be adapted to each country, and it is an integrated framework. And I will show you later that Asia, including Sri Lanka, can lead the way to this peace and prosperity. So in 1992, at the Rio Earth Summit, long time ago, actually 30 years ago, not 25, I presented a framework called Sustainomics and Balanced Inclusive Green Growth. And this is helpful to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So the first core concept here is called climbing the mountain, which is basically that if you are an individual, all these problems look very daunting. Okay, so what can I do? Well, it's like climbing a mountain where the peak is covered with clouds you can't see, but you keep walking uphill, eventually you'll reach the peak. So when you leave this room, you can switch off the light, you can turn off a tap, you can plant a tree, you can eat less meat. A lot of things we can do as individuals, okay? Pick up the plastic on the road. So empowerment is a very important principle. And this can be done not only at the individual level, but in your company, in your city, nationally, and eventually globally, bottom up. Right? At the firm level, there are many things like corporate social responsibility and ESG, which are now coming into the forefront. The second core concept, which was actually quite new in 1992, now it is very well known. We need economic progress. Why? Because how do you raise the poor out of poverty without economic progress, right? But we need to protect the environment at the same time. And we need social inclusion and empowerment so that everybody benefits from this progress. Inequality has to stop. And any subject like climate or poverty can be analyzed in terms of the balance between these three. It's a balanced approach. If you look at different types of capital, you have this building, the car that you use. These are essential for economic progress, right? Natural capital, the air, the land, the water. You need that from the environmental side. And there is something called social capital. This is the glue that binds people together, okay? The social networks, the personal networks, and also values and ethics. Very seriously underestimated, and conflict is the main destroyer of social capital. Without that unity of purpose, without the science, diplomacy, and other tools, we will not make much progress. We need all of these. The third core concept is equally important, and that is what goes on in our minds. We need innovation and fresh ideas. We need to transcend certain boundaries, okay? The first one is value systems. We have to replace unethical social values from a very young age. So greed, selfishness, corruption, violence, these have no place in a sustainable world. Unfortunately, that is driving current economies. So you have a pattern of economic maldevelopment. Growth is based on debt, poverty, overconsumption at the same time. See, our grandparents saved much more than we did, and their investment is what we are benefiting from. In our generation, we have learned a new truth, which is that it's better to borrow than to save. So we have borrowed from our children and our grandchildren, so our lifestyle is very good. But what are we leaving but a huge debt? And that is also the environmental debt. So you have depletion of resources, pollution, climate, all these other things. And remember, the less resources you have, the more you fight. If you look at any of the wars, all these high-minded say, oh, we are intervening because of human rights. It's all nonsense. Countries intervene in other countries for resources, for oil, for gas, for water, for land. So until we break this unsustainable cycle, we will not get anywhere. The sustainable development space is always shrinking. The other thing, as academics, we have to keep in mind is to transcend disciplines, because all the sustainable development issues on the left-hand side are extremely diverse. So we need to bring all of the disciplines and sustainomics. In fact, I teach a course to graduate students emphasizing this very much. So this seems a bit unfair, because certainly when I did my PhD, all my supervisor said is, you have to prove to me that in your narrow subject area, which is certain area of solid state physics, that you are the leading expert in the world, that your thesis is something original. I tell my students the same thing. You have to show that you are doing original research. But by the way, don't forget, you also have to know a little bit about other subjects. So that broader idea that to solve practical problems, that you have to understand at least the jargon of other disciplines and work with them is very important. We have to keep in mind as teachers, as students. Then, transcending stakeholder boundaries. This is extremely important, and we find that governments increasingly are less and less capable of solving the complex problems we have today. So civil society, academia, and business, I very much believe that business is part of the solution, not necessarily part of the problem. They must push governments to do the right thing. It's not enough just to criticize and that they are useless bunch. You have to show them what needs to be done. Otherwise, how do they know? So this triangle must work. This is the implementation triangle. And last point, of course, the core concept fourth for sustainomics is just implement, implement, implement. There are many wonderful theories, some of which I have inflicted on the world, which are just lying on a shelf, not implemented. So until we implement at least a fraction of the knowledge, as we know as scientists, we won't get anywhere. Now let's talk about this balanced, inclusive green growth, right? This is essential to prevent the collapse of many unsustainable global systems. And one way of looking at this is, if you look at environmental damage on the vertical axis, let's say greenhouse gas emissions, okay? On the horizontal axis is economic prosperity, GDP. If you're a poor country, you have low GDP, but you have low emissions. If you're a rich country, you're at point C. You have high emissions above the safe global limit, but you are also rich, so you can protect yourself. Most countries are in the middle, B, including Sri Lanka. What do we do? The triangle here is very unbalanced. So the first point is called green growth. So you have to balance economy and environment. If you know physics, There is a problem called the three-body problem, which is very difficult to solve mathematically, but you can do it through iteration. So three things are difficult to harmonize. If you can't, start with two. This is the whole point. Balance economy and environment. First, we know, for example, that the rich countries have technologies which can reduce material consumption by a large amount. Okay? And therefore you dematerialize, you reduce the consumption of materials, emission of greenhouse gases, but you maintain a very high lifestyle. So to be environmentally progressive does not mean to be poor, right? Not at all. Both can be done. What about the middle countries? We do not want to follow that wasteful path that the Western countries did in the last 200 years, okay? There is the green growth tunnel, okay? The whole point here is there are these technologies which you can use to leap from. And that is where science comes in. And the third aspect is, now you see the triangle is complete. We have to make these policies pro-poor inclusive, so that all the benefits are shared. That is balanced, inclusive socially, green environmentally, and economic growth as well. And this approach can be used for water and energy and other things as well. Just take a look at consumption of food, okay, as an example. That's a rich family in Europe. Now, they can certainly maintain or improve their lifestyle, but they can do less with packaging, the food waste. That is the 30 to 50% of Western households waste their food, right? While 800 million people are starving. So that situation can be improved without reducing their lifestyle. Look at the family at the bottom. In their case, there is no conservation. They can have hardly enough food to eat. So you have to raise them out of poverty, but along the green growth tunnel, okay? Not in the wasteful part of the rich. So this is an aspect of sustainable consumption. I can also tell you that I've worked on other things. In 2012, there was an Earth Summit in Rio again, and I got tired of listening to the world leaders making empty promises, so I went to the beach in Rio, which is a fabulous place, by the way. I met a whole lot of musicians. We formed an organization called Sustaino Musica, because everybody knows that this kind of discourse can reach maybe 0.001% of the population. Music can reach hundreds of millions. They are going to raves, they are going to concerts, Sangeeta, Sandakshani, whatever. You teach music of sustainability. So you use whatever tools are available, the social media and others, to reach the target population. And production not to be neglected. I've worked with some of the biggest companies, multinationals in the world, with the boards of directors, senior CEOs and managers, and they all see that sustainability is very important. You can see that in their annual reports. Some of them are sincere, some of them are greenwashing, but at least they're trying. Okay? For them, green growth is very attractive. Why? Because you use less energy, less water, less environmental resources. That is, you can increase your profits because your costs go down. But at the same time, you're reducing the burden on the environment. So it's a win-win option. Now the third aspect is more difficult. How do you have ethical values? We are trying to educate in business schools and elsewhere ethical business leaders. It's a tough task, but it is very important if we want to improve the contribution of business to sustainability. Let me tell you a little example, something a little more practical rather than theoretical, about how we apply something called life cycle analysis, value chain analysis, to improve the sustainability of production. Okay, it's not just empty words. There is a way, for example, to map out how various goods are produced, okay, through their life cycle. So this is called a process map. You have a raw material, you manufacture, you can distribute, you retail it, the consumers use it, and then you have recycling or waste disposal. Now if you look at tea, and we analyze, this is for major tea company in Sri Lanka, where are the points where carbon dioxide is emitted, right? So this is finding the hotspot. And we found that 47% of emissions happen in the retail. So for this tea producer, if they focused on the retail, they could reduce their carbon footprint, their emissions immediately, without bothering too much about the other areas. That's a hotspot analysis. What is the retail? Is all the packaging, the plastics and other things to make the tea packet look nice, which is not really necessary for your enjoyment of the tea. If you look at orange juice, which in this case was transported from Brazil to the UK, 47% of emissions happens in transport, which is because it's transported by ship. So if you make the shipping more efficient, you can squeeze your emissions, right? If you look at milk that is produced in the UK, 76% is in the farmhouse. So there you have to educate the farmers. You say, don't do this, do the other thing. Then you reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, right? And last but not least, we did garments for also a big garment company in Sri Lanka. 65% is in raw material. All the greenhouse gases are embedded in the plastic, the lace and the other things that go into garment production, right? So if you buy source raw materials that are low in carbon emissions, then you can reduce the carbon footprint, right? So it applies throughout the supply chain. So you need sustainable consumers and sustainable producers working together, right? And eventually you try to spread that through society to form a sustainable culture, right? Traditional markets for older people like me, you can go to a Polar, you can go to organic market, you can carry your shopping bag, which is not plastic, reusable. For young people, much better to go to online markets. I support a number of worldwide online markets where they have only sustainable products, right? And that is very popular among young people, right? So we can spread this culture. Digital technology